the kinds of things that we're going to be doing in particular, as humanity expands into space is just mind-boggling and incredibly inspiring. And it's going to happen a lot sooner than I think anybody realizes.
Hello, and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. Let's get the next journey started. Our guest today certainly has a vast journey to discuss, all the way from Star Wars to SpaceX. He's David Anderman, an attorney and seasoned executive with a passion for business strategy and deal-making. David's sweet spot is the intersection of technology, media, and consumer products. He's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania with a BA in film theory and political science. He then earned his JD at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School, where he was the executive editor of the Law Review, all while interning and drafting opinions at the Supreme Court of California. He is currently the president of Proxima Centauro, LLC, where he advises technology startups and venture funds in strategy, deal-making, IP, and political matters. David is a resident of California, an avid skier and sailor. Welcome, David Anderman. David?
So much, Carl.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I know we tried a little while ago and I had some difficulty doing it at that time, but thank you for sticking in there with me. You know, I think it's only fair, since I know you 40 years, that you do such a thing.
It's my pleasure. It's absolutely my pleasure, Carl.
You know, you have a remarkable background, a remarkable journey, as I said in the introduction, from Star Wars to SpaceX, and that's an incredible range of people. And, you know, I'm sure you have lots of stories to tell about everything that went on in between. And I am so happy to see your progress as you go from one position to another position, and now in your own venture there, raising funds for other companies that are reaching out into space. You know, a few years ago, this would have all been make-believe. Would have been,
That's right.
You know, like when Lucas did it, it was all make-believe. Now you're making it really happen.
Right.
Really
Yeah,
exciting.
totally. It's funny. I joke that I went from fictional space to real space. And that's actually the truth. I mean, the things that people only imagined at one time are now becoming reality. And, you know, the next 10, 20 years is going to be amazing. Just overall is going to be amazing. But the kinds of things that we're going to be doing as in particular, as humanity expands into space is just mind-boggling and incredibly inspiring, and something I'm very, very, very passionate about.
You know, I'm so happy to see that, because years ago when we'd have conversation groups of us and we talk about it, you think it's impossible to have a colony of people out in space or to mine minerals from space. And everybody would say, no, how is that going to happen? It takes you 11 million years to go back and forth. But that's not true anymore, is it?
Oh, it's not only is it not true, it's going to happen a lot sooner than I think anybody realizes. You know, I'm literally, so one of the things I'm doing now, I left SpaceX a little over a year ago. And I since have raised a fund with two partners called Stellar Ventures. We've raised $22 million as our initial close of our fund in order to fund early stage space companies. And what's unbelievable is I get pitched every day. In fact, I just got off a call with another pitch. And I get pitched every day on these ideas for new space companies. And truly, literally, I've been pitched on space mining companies. I've been pitched on fuel depots and commodity depots in outer space, some of which, of course, are based on blockchain technology to create marketplaces for exchanging, you know, resources in space, you know, people building habitats. But then, you know, from the sublime to the mundane, you know, we're also looking at companies that create low cost, high power, you know, solar arrays for the vastly increased number of satellites and spacecraft that are existing and will exist. And it's a truly exciting time to be alive. And one of the things that's even more amazing is when you talk about space colonies, most people don't realize this, you know, and Elon Musk does this out in the open. One of the things I worked on at SpaceX was this new Starship rocket that's being built in southern Texas. That rocket is a colony ship. It's a colony ship for Mars. And it's designed to bring 100 colonists at a time every trip to Mars. And Elon wants to build 1,000 of these things to transport 100,000 people to Mars every 2 years. And what's amazing,
2 years.
Every 2 years, when Earth and Mars align in orbit, that's the time at which you can send a rocket from
So shortest distance, of course. Yeah.
because it's the closest. And Elon's plan is ultimately to be able to send 1,000 of these starships to Mars every 2 years, every time the planets align. And what people don't realize is this rocket's been built. It flies. It's already while it was at SpaceX, we launched it and landed it. And it is mind-bogglingly big. And his plan is to land humans on Mars in 2027.
Oh, my goodness. That's right around the corner.
When I interviewed with Elon, he said to me two things. He said, first, he said, David, I want to die on Mars, just not on impact.
Yeah.
And he also said his plan, and what he means is he wants to retire and die in natural causes in a self-sustaining colony on Mars. And what he means by that is a colony that has, call it 100,000 people, and is able to survive on its own without any additional resources from Earth.
Self-contained.
And he's 50 years old, and he wants to retire and be there by 70. So in the next 20 years, he wants a self-sustaining city on Mars. So these ideas you were joking about initially there about, colonies in space, this is real. This is happening.
Especially when you talk about a man like that making those statements. Other people, you might look at it a little jaundiced, but this man seems to put his money where his mouth is, and he perfects what he goes after.
He does.
He's incredible. When you look at what he's done with the reusable rockets already that put all the satellites in space and bring them back down to exactly where you want them without being destroyed and reuse them again. That's such innovation. So
the only reason he did that, the only reason he did that was to get to Mars. Because what he does is, what Elon does, and he's very famous for this, and it's a famous practice. He works from first principles. And what he said to himself, when we start SpaceX's company mission, its company goal is to make life multiplanetary. That's the goal. And everybody at the company knows it. And everybody at the company knows the way to achieve that is by creating a self-sustaining colony on Mars. Every single employee, top to bottom, knows that. I used to go out and, just when I first got there, I would randomly sit down in the cafeteria and have lunch with people and ask them, what's the company mission and what are you doing to achieve it? Every single one of them, to a person, could describe to me not only this, we're going to go to Mars and create a colony, but could also describe how it was on that very day, the thing that they were doing contributed to that goal. Amazing. So it's an incredibly mission-aligned team. That's one of the things that Elon is so good at. It's what he did at Tesla. The mission is really to save the Earth from climate catastrophe. That's the goal. That's right. Tesla. And he did it, right? And he will go down in history as the man who single-handedly transformed certainly the vehicle business to electric from fossil fuels in order to help save the planet. The same with SpaceX, it's the same mission and goal. And what he did was he worked back from the final principle. The principle was, we're going to make life multiplanetary. How do you do that? Well, one of the first things you need to do is to make access to space much more effective and cheaper and efficient, both in terms of capacity, the mass to orbit. And that's why you hear Elon on Twitter always talking about mass to orbit, mass to orbit. How much mass can you get to orbit and how much does it cost per kilogram? And the cost has gone down already because of Elon Musk by many orders of magnitude. When I started, it was, even at SpaceX only a few years ago, a dedicated launch would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And before you had reusable rockets, as you point out, before you had reusable rockets, you'd launch a rocket, $1 billion rocket into space, and it would be destroyed. Once the payload reached orbit, the rocket itself was lost. And imagine if every time you took a flight to London, you landed and the 777 was blown up afterwards.
Yeah.
How much would it cost for a ticket to go to London?
Totally prohibitive.
$100 million to go to London. Sure. You have to go with something very, very, very important to do something like that.
Right.
So to Elon, it was insane that we would, destroy a resource like that. So he said, well, then we have to make the rockets reusable. And everybody in the industry globally thought he was nuts. And he just said, look, it's possible. There's no limit from a physics perspective. So we can do it. And
I just can't help thinking when you say people said he was nuts. I think back in all the history, every visionary people said was nuts. Everybody. It's little dropping an apple for gravity. He's nuts. It can't be. Got to be crazy. But, God gives us these inspirations, these people that he pokes in and, and he gives a superhuman capacity to think beyond the box and say, Well, it's, you know what Kennedy said it. Don't think about what is, think about what could be. Go beyond.
Well, what it's so funny you say that. So one of the people that was, so I worked for George Lucas at Lucasfilm, George of Star Wars and Indiana Jones fame. And I worked for George for 16 years and sold his company to Disney in 2012. And so I actually, when I decided to interview with Elon for SpaceX, I went to George and I asked him to be my reference, and he was kind enough to say yes. So I sat down with him, we had breakfast, and we were talking about it. He was very excited, like everyone, about what Elon is doing in space and making life multiplanetary and realizing some of the dreams that George himself has had. And he was very excited. But he looked at me and he said, we were sitting at breakfast, and he looked at me and he says, but, David, are you sure you want to go work for another nutcase? And I said, George, I refer to you as a visionary.
Of course.
Said, come on, David, that's just code word for nutcase. And, it's truly one of the things that, it was interesting was just that was what Elon was interested in as well. I'm not a rocket scientist. I didn't know anything about the reality of space business. And he didn't care, right? That's not something Elon cares about. What he cares about is, in this case, it was, everyone, all the executives at SpaceX were like, look, how do you deal with someone who does things that no one has ever done before? And that's what
you run along and try to keep up.
Exactly. Run fast.
Okay, so let's switch the clock a little bit. Now you've been living in this world of reality, can be and will do. But let's go back a few years to those 16 years ago, or more than that, actually, at this point. Now you're a young man, a young attorney. You're coming to work in the equivalent of an adult Disneyland treasure land of make-believe. Everything there was fantasy, and who can create the most livable and believable dream? What was that like?
That was amazing. Look, it's funny. My sisters like to say that I manifested my 8-year-old self into all my career. And, when I was 8 years old, the referring to is when I was 8 years old, I went and saw the original Star Wars film in the movie theater 17 times that summer. And it's something I didn't tell George when I started working there. I did tell him, I actually told him on the plane on the way to Disney when we were selling the company, I said, by the way, George, I want to admit to you, I was a huge Star Wars fan before I started working for you. He just laughed. And, but, it was really a dream come true for me. I mean, you go to a place like Skywalker Ranch where literally there's no limit to what the imagination can do. Right. That's one of the things that George taught me is that, there really is, we can do anything. We can create anything. We can make anything. And my job was to basically create the infrastructure to allow George to do that. And I'm very proud of that, and very proud of being given responsibility ultimately for preserving his legacy with Disney. But going to work or going to an interview at Skywalker Ranch, when I first got that call, it was in the late 90s. And I had done a little bit of work as a lawyer, as an intellectual property lawyer for the Lucasfilm companies. And I got a call from someone I worked with, a partner I worked with. He said, hey, you want to go interview at Skywalker Ranch? And that's like saying, hey, do you want to go interview at Elon Musk's rocket factory? Always yes.
Of course.
And, I was perfectly happy in a law firm and being an intellectual property litigator. But of course, you go to Skywalker Ranch and it's just magical, right? The environment that George has created to foster creativity primarily. Just the environment that he creates in order to, make sure that people are working together to realize a common vision, a common dream, and be creative in doing so is really just amazing. And it is a very magical place with very talented people, and being able to work there and help to, realize that dream and figure out how to bring it out to the world, to fans around the world is just a real privilege and honor. And it was amazing. One of the things I was most struck by, I started working there about 1.5 years or so before we released the first of the new Star Wars prequel trilogy. So the first 3 films had been created, released 1977, 1980, 1983. And then, there was a long period where there were no Star Wars films. And then George, started work in the 90s on this new trilogy of films. And to be there in 1999 with literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of people excited to see this, the work that we created, that George had created, and be part of that. And Lucasfilm itself, the actual parent company, is not very big. It's a couple hundred people at the end of the day. And there's thousands of people that we hire to make the films. We have, our visual effects company, Industrial Light and Magic, and Skywalker Sound. So the overall, a couple thousand people, but still to see this, the impact that a couple thousand people can have on the entire planet, and see people lining up and excited and thrilled to be engaging in the stories that we were telling, was really just, spine-tingling. Even now I get the chills thinking about it. And it was really something amazing to see how a relatively small group of people can really change the world. And I think Elon Musk is doing the same thing, right?
I agree. So you're not going to remember this, but I want to remind you of a story. Back at that time in the late 90s, when I was working with your dad and in San Francisco all the time, you were gracious enough to arrange a visit to the offices there in the Presidium. And I brought my youngest son, Matthew, and my grandson, Ian, and pardon me, my grandson, Giovanni. It was before Ian. He came later. And you showed us around the office. And when they saw that particular room of yours with all those thousands of little miniatures of everything that happened, well, you made a hero out of me. And because I got them in there, And I must admit, I was a grown adult, but I was just as in awe as they were. It was
just for everyone's context, the room that we brought them into, and the Giovanni was young at that point in particular. We brought them into the room where we kept samples of every single Star Wars toy that's made. And it's, as you might imagine, a very big room filled with incredible, unbelievable toys and licensed products from all around the world. And oh my God, kids, when they see that room, just go crazy.
I was a big kid. I went crazy when I saw it.
Yeah,
it's incredible. I know your new venture talks about how this particular satellite or heavenly feature goes around its own sun 11 times. I mean, every 11 days it goes around its own sun. So at that rate, 30 birthdays a year, I'd be 2,400 years old by now. And not
right. You'd be wiser than Yoda.
Oh, I'd be Yoda. So that's got to be a very exciting thing for you. That's what you're doing, entering into at this point, because you're going to help this change. Right?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, we raised this fund to invest in early stage space companies, which something you couldn't have done before. You couldn't have done this even 5 years ago, because what's happened is the thing I learned at SpaceX is that a couple of things. First of all, access to space is much cheaper, and where it used to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to launch a rocket to space, now you can launch. Well, even when I was there, you could launch 250 kilograms of payload to orbit for $1 million, and you can order that launch in 30 seconds from your smartphone. And that's a program that Elon asked me to help put together, and that we did, and we're successful in signing people up to do it. Well, with this new rocket I was talking about, this Mars colony ship called Starship that's being built in Texas, that will be, hopefully orbital by the end of this year. That rocket will be able to launch, ultimately probably 250 metric tons. Wow. From 250 kilograms to 250 metric tons, 1,000 times more for exactly the same price, for $1 million.
Oh my goodness. So that opens the world enormously to smaller companies, smaller ventures who are newly coming in, creating their own network of clients and activities. That's
precisely, Paul. And when we were growing up, when you were growing up, when I was growing up, the space business globally was a government business, right? SpaceX. While I was at SpaceX, we launched this program called Demo 2, the crew launch for the International Space Station for American astronauts. The first time that over 10 years since the shuttle retired, that American astronauts were launched into orbit, to space, to go to the International Space Station. So that 10-year period, they were going on Russian rockets. They were going to Russia and launch with Soyuz.
Right.
And so the SpaceX was the first private company in 2020 to launch humans into orbit. And before that, only 3 countries had done it: the United States, China, and India, and Russia. United States, Russia, and China. And so it was the first private company to do that. And that's incredibly difficult. But, now all of these companies are private. And now with this price point, not only can you for on the amount of money that a small startup can raise, 5, 10, $15 million. I get pitched all the time on companies that are able to say they will be able to launch a prototype satellite, launch into space, and prove the technology on orbit for less than $10 million.
Oh my.
And that's unprecedented. And it's almost like saying that, you're going to invest in the internet in 1994. Right? Like this incredible infrastructure has been created, and the cost to reach the stars, like the cost to reach the internet in 1994, suddenly became so incredibly cheap and accessible. The number of things that people are going to do, the things that people are going to come up with is ultimately mind blowing. It's really just
so you mentioned a moment ago that China and Russia are deeply involved in that, and have been for the last 10 years. With their own rocket capabilities. But I can imagine that just like the arms race, when they begin to see the amount of people who are reaching out to space for many different applications that would affect mankind, not only commercially, but geopolitically, potentially, I have to imagine they'd have to get into that kind of a situation and try to compete.
The Chinese in particular are extremely well aware of how access to space is going to change, and are moving unbelievably aggressively to take advantage of that and be the first to space, and have not only government and military, of course, operations, but private. They're launching, private companies are launching in China all the time to take advantage of the space, and they see something like what we launched at SpaceX. One of the main reasons I was brought in SpaceX was to help set up and help launch the Starlink global low Earth orbit internet system, broadband internet. And already 3 different companies in China plus the government have launched their own low Earth orbit satellite internet businesses, because they know this is truly disruptive and game changing in terms of
absolutely
how telecommunications will work on the planet. And many other ideas. And so the Russians so the Chinese in particular, the Russians are, also doing the thing. Obviously, they have more constraints on what they're doing. They've been working, they've very much focused on technology that already exists, works incredibly well, namely the Soyuz, but that's a 60, 70-year-old program. And, I'm not sure how much they're investing in the next generation of space technology. But
They seem to be looking backwards quite a bit, and you can't change the world looking backwards. You have to look forward.
And countries like India are also looking forward and are investing heavily in space technology.
It's one of the largest economies in the world. It's growing in leaps and bounds. They have to be innovative and join the race. They'll be left behind. They have to.
Right. There's no doubt about it. And so the United States obviously is very aggressively pushing forward in space. As much as I say that we've moved toward private companies doing this, and it's really private companies getting funded. A lot of that funding is still coming from the U.S. government. And I will say that the U.S. government, both NASA and the Department of Defense, are extremely bullish and excited about the opportunities to, achieve their missions in space. Creating a space force, for example, was just one aspect of it. But already the military spends tremendous amounts of money on pushing forward the boundary of what's possible in space. And
but they're really smart in funding and sponsoring the private sector, because the private sector gets things done much better than the bureaucracies of government. When they're profit motivated and you let it go and you put it into the hands of private sector, you get accomplishments faster than you do when you put it into the hands of the government.
That's right. And I think it took a long time for the government to see that, especially with space, right? NASA for many years was very skeptical of the ability of a private company to do this. Very famously, only a little over 10 years ago, people like Neil Armstrong were very publicly doubting whether someone like Elon Musk could do what he said he was going to do.
Yeah. After all, the first time around, they gave us time,
Right.
The orange juice jink that they used for the astronaut that they kept putting their hands on for years, saying the development of space was Tang.
Right.
The heck was that?
Well, in fairness, a lot of incredible technology. The fact that, that the NASA was able to create the Apollo program and land a human on the moon using the technology of the 1960s is even today astounding.
Yeah.
Certainly to the rocket scientists at SpaceX who, are building their own rockets, and it is rocket science and it's very difficult. It's astounding that that NASA was able to pull that off in the 1960s. But then again, it's been that long, over 50 years since we've returned a human to another planet. And within this decade, I know we'll return humans both to the moon and most likely to Mars as well. And that's, and I do think that private companies, I know at this point, the government has realized that the programs like SpaceX has are the best way to move forward to the next level of what human exploration in space is going to be. And the Department of Defense realizes that as well. And that these companies, these small startups, by funding these very, really out there ideas for what can be done, they are, reaping huge rewards in terms of the technology that it's available to the U.S. military as well. So exciting time.
I had a friend who passed away from COVID last year. His name was Barry Gorson. Great guy. He was, when he was a young man, he was an engineer who was put in charge of developing the program to land the first orbiter on the moon.
Yeah.
He was the first. He had a team of guys doing it. And he admitted to me one night that it was an enormous responsibility that gave him ulcers at a young age. And he realized that unless there was some miraculous thing happening, they weren't sure they were going to be able to do it. Right until the end, when they finally saw that they could do it, they weren't sure they could.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's very, very interesting. And one of the things I learned working for Elon is you've probably heard people talked about this with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had what people called a reality distortion field around him, namely that he would come up with these ideas and that seemed crazy when you first hear them, but he would create this aura of inevitability around being able to do the impossible. And it was, they described Steve Jobs as having this reality distortion field around him that everyone around him just believed the same way. Well, there's nothing like what Elon does with respect to these things, right? And you asked anybody, like you said at the beginning, if anybody else told you that they were going to land humans on Mars in the decade, they'd look at you like you're nuts.
Yeah, right.
Elon is able to create this, reality distortion field that everyone understands and believes it. And when I first got to SpaceX in my first couple of weeks, I saw it and I was blown away. And in my first check-in meeting with Elon, I said, look, I have to tell you, I've never seen a company so mission-aligned, so focused at their core to achieving this mission and goal and believing that it can happen. And, he himself is amazed, but he just creates that. He creates that environment that everyone believes that this is not only what the mission is, but that we will be able to achieve it. And it's obviously achievable. That's what's amazing.
David, I want to ask you a question. We're having this wonderful conversation and we're coming on 40 minutes, which means my clock is going to say it's over. And I haven't gotten into half of the questions I want to ask you. Would you come back and do it again?
Of course I will. Absolutely be happy to.
Thank you so much, because I'm loving this conversation and I don't want to cut it short. So I got a minute to give you anything you'd like to say before we close it down.
Well, look, I think it's, first of all, thank you so much for having this podcast and talking to people, about interesting things. I'm honored that you would include me among them, including my own father, Sig Anderman.
Absolutely.
Who's
the number one guest.
Well, your first guest.
The first guest.
And when Carl jokes about us going way back, Carl has been involved with my father and myself for all of those years. And, you've seen a lot of the things that I've done, and it's been wonderful having you along for that ride. But I do appreciate, the mentorship and the guidance my parents gave me, and my father in particular, just in terms of the business side of things. It's been such a life pleasure to be able to share those things with him, and both of us to go through our own journeys of building companies and learning about new things. And it's just been incredibly exciting and gratifying to me. So thank you so much for hosting both the Anderman father and son on your podcast.
Love it. Maybe I can get you hit together one day.
Yeah, no doubt. We'd need more than 40 minutes. I'm sure of that.
Well, I can arrange it. David, thank you so much for being with us. And I'd be remiss if you've given proper credit to your dad, but I'd be remiss if I didn't remember Susan. Your mom was, in my mind, one of the most wonderful ladies I've ever known. And
Absolutely. We miss her. And she was an incredible influence on me as well. And I'm just very thankful that I'm able to be where I am because of what they've done and the way they inspired me to do these things.
Thank you, David. I'm going to send you another invitation. We're going to do it again.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining our show today. I hope it resonated with you. If it didn't, I don't know what would. This was fantastic. And we certainly will do it again. I remind you, we come out with a new podcast every Wednesday morning. Look for us in all the various places and be sure to subscribe so you get notices. And one more thing, everybody has their own story to tell. You have yours. I know you do. And no one can tell it like you can. Write it down. Share it with people. It's your legacy. Because when it's too late, it's too late. No one will know. So, as I say every time, tell someone you love them today. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning into the show. I hope that it resonated with you. It certainly did with me. And I hope it encouraged you to realize the true power of your story. As a reminder, new episodes will be released Wednesday mornings on your favorite podcast apps and also on YouTube as well. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn your notification button on to ensure that you receive updates on new episode releases. I'm grateful for your reviews and your support. The love is certainly felt. Keep it coming. You can reach out to connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, or stop by my website, toeverypageofturning.com. All links are clickable in the show notes for quick access. Do you think that you or someone you know may be our most inspiring guest yet? Let's hope so. Click on our contact page and get in touch on my website and share your story. I look forward to reading each one personally. My best-selling book, To Every Page of Turning, which was published by Mascot Books, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, and many more popular book retailers. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Till next time, remember that every day is a new opportunity to write your new page in your incredible journey. And it is incredible. You're the only one who has it.